Hey everyone, it's Jen. Welcome back to the channel. I'm here today to show you something that I'm going to be working on, and I just thought maybe you would find it interesting, and that is blocking some swatches. I got to thinking about how in a lot of knitting and crochet patterns, the end of the pattern, it just says block piece, block shawl, lightly block if desired, block to finished measurements. But it's not very often in a pattern that we even say what that means. So maybe you know how to block things, maybe you don't. But I just have a couple of swatches here that I need to block. They're just stockinette stitch swatches. I'm working on some instructional things coming up. And so I just have a couple of swatches to block. And I thought we could go through the process. I could just talk to you a little bit about how I like to do it. I always say that blocking your knits or crochets, it's more of an art than a science. So let's get into the art of blocking a swatch. Okay, so here I have my bowl that I have my swatches in. So this is a bowl that I have just for my yarn projects because as a designer and an instructor, I block a lot of stuff. So this bowl used to be like a party chip bowl. But now I just use it only for yarn projects, like I said. So you just want like some kind of vessel or container to put your project in, obviously. This bowl I actually can get, even pretty decent size shells into. You just want to make sure that you can fully submerge your, whatever your project is, into the water. So you could, put the stopper in your kitchen sink or bathroom sink, a bathtub. You just obviously want to make sure that those things are clean first before, you dunk your shawl in that you spent, 40 hours knitting or something. Anyway, so this particular yarn is 100% wool. It is not superwash. So that means that it could potentially felt. So I always go with like a lukewarm water. You just really don't want it to be too hot. Especially when you're using something like wool, which will felt. I did add some no rinse wool wash into this. I actually had a little sample packet from a convention I had attended over the summer. And so I just threw it in there. It does have a scent to it. The wool washes do have scents and also come unscented. So it's just something to keep in mind because if you're, giving your knit or crochet item to somebody and they might be sensitive to smells. So this one did have a little bit of a smell to it, but the swatches are staying in my house. So that was fine. But as I'm a designer, I send a lot of samples and things other places. In that case, I always use like the non-scented wool wash. It's a totally optional step. But who knows where you were knitting or crocheting, your item could probably use a wash anyway. So like I said, we've got the lukewarm water in there. I added the wool wash. I just kind of give it a little stir like this. And then you want to fully submerge your items. Again, I didn't need very much water. I have two little swatches here. And then you want to leave them for, some amount of time. I always say at least 30 minutes. And that for me personally is kind of on the low end. This particular bowl, I had filled up actually a couple hours ago and just let it sit until I was ready to show you what to do. Sometimes I'm lazy and leave them overnight. The point is that you want the fibers of the yarn to be like fully saturated. And so it needs time to do that. You can give them sort of a gentle squeeze, but again, this is 100% wool. I don't want to start really squeezing it or wringing it because I will start felting the yarn and that's not what we want for these swatches. So I just kind of, just swish them around a little, let them get fully submerged and then just leave them in there for at least 30 minutes. Really, I like to say a minimum is an hour, but in a pinch, 30 minutes is okay. And now we're ready to take them out. So again, it's no rinse, so I can just do this right here at my desk. So you can see I just have like a couple of my kitchen towels down here just to cover my table. But then I also have this really old towel that I'm going to use to get most of the yarn, get most of the water out of the swatches. So this is like, the towel that you don't care about. And the reason for that is sometimes the yarn dye, depending on the color, can still be running. And that's a time when you might want to rinse your swatches, is if you made something red and this water is red, you might want to carefully rinse it out, you know, before blocking it. You know, there are certain colors where they do just have a tendency to run. That's why I always use an old towel just in case some little bit of the dye or something comes off. Now, I've taken my swatches out, and you could do this one at a time or whatever, and you just want to kind of squeeze the excess water out. You don't want to really wring it, and you don't want to like twist it. You just want to kind of gently squeeze, because we don't want to, again, start felting this. And then I'm just going to lay this one down here. And now I'll do the same with this one. Just taking our time here. And then I'm going to lay it down flat here. And I'm just going to go ahead and move my bowl of water out of the way. Water's out of the way. I have my swatches on my towel. So the next thing I'm going to do is just roll this up. So that way they're still staying pretty flat while they're in here. And now I'm just going to squeeze them again. You know, when I'm not showing you on camera, I might be in my kitchen doing this, and I might even put this on the floor and then step on it to really squeeze the excess yarn out. We're really just trying, or I keep saying to squeeze the excess yarn out. We're going to squeeze the excess water out. You really just want these to be kind of damp when you go to block them. You don't want them to be like soaking wet, because they're just going to take longer to dry. And then we'll just unroll it. And here's my other one kind of rolled off there. Sometimes if they're still really damp, I'll put it on, you know, a drier part of the towel and roll it up again and squeeze it again, but these feel pretty good. Okay, so let's move all this stuff out of the way. All right, so here's my 2 swatches. One thing you might notice, and this is just something I do again because I make a lot of swatches and stuff just as part of my job, is I always put a plastic locking stitch marker on the right side of my work. And actually when I'm doing swatches, I always do them on the bottom right corner. I mean, you can look at your knitting and figure out which was the cast on and the bind off, obviously, but that's just something I like to do just as a real quick way of, I don't even have to look at it that close, that I know this is the bottom right corner, so this is my cast on and this was my bind off. Sometimes it can come in handy on certain projects. So anyway, that's just why those 2 are there. This one I did kind of weave in the ends, and this one I didn't. It's kind of personal preference. I see it both ways, whether you want to weave in your ends first or second. A lot of times what I like to do is weave in the ends and then cut them and leave maybe like an inch or 2 of the yarn still hanging out. And then after I block it, I'll like trim that end further closer to the fabric. But like this one, I'll just weave it in later, whatever. Okay, let's just start with one here. I'm gonna start with this one because this one's gonna show up better. So just ignore my little yarn tails. I'll deal with those later. Okay, so I've brought in this little blocking mat here. These you can get at your local yarn store. You can purchase them from online yarn stores. That's where I got mine. Some of them do have like grids on them. Mine don't. I just have like a few packages of these. You don't need a lot. I mean, it really just depends on your projects and like what you're making. Again, I made a bunch of shawl books. I have a lot of these blocking mats in my house. But for the average person, you're not trying to block 4 shawls at once. So just like 1 or 2 of these sets is probably all you need. You don't need these in order to block your item. You also could block it on like a spare bed or something like that if you have one in your house. The only thing is, again, you want to be careful, because if the yarn bleeds and you have like your great grandmother's handmade quilt on that bed, you don't want like, you know, any yarn to like bleed onto it. So just like think about that too. But I think these blocking mats are really great. You can even use like flooring that you could get at like a, you know, like a hardware store or something like that, like for your garage floor or something. They're like a little like gym flooring. It's just like this foam stuff, the kid mat. I mean, you can find this stuff all kinds of places. Anyway, so now let's go ahead and do some actual blocking. So I have a few tools here that I am going to use. So I have a few different things that I block with. The most common thing you'll see are rust-proof T-pins, and they look like this. They're literally just really sharp pins. One thing I will say about rust-proof T-pins is I personally feel like they are not rust-proof for forever. Again, if you're somebody that has been knitting and crocheting a long time and your rust-proof T-pins are really old, you know, I found like once they hit about 10 years, you might just want to replace them. I have had a little bit of rust come off on a project. But these are pretty inexpensive, and they're something that you can just, you know, throw into your cart here and there if you do need more. And then they also make blocking pins like this. It's like a comb. And I really like these because now I don't need 8 pins. I only just need this one thing. And so especially on something like a swatch here, you know, I can just go across like this with the little comb. And I'll leave links to these down below if you are interested in, you know, checking them out. These comb ones come in different sizes, and they come in a nice little box. I just block so many things that I have now just kind of thrown a lot of my blocking pins into one container, and then I'm just careful when I open it. Okay, the other things you might need are like a ruler or a yardstick. Again, this is just depends on how technical you're trying to be with your swatches. I'm not necessarily trying to hit like an exact measurement, but you know, you might need a ruler or a tape measure. So those are things I just have nearby if I do want to check, because I do kind of want these to be rectangle or square. So, you know, having those things are helpful. So let's go ahead and start. A lot of times with these blocking mats, when I'm doing a swatch, I'll usually start sort of just on one edge here because I know that that's, you know, pretty straight. And now I'm just going to start pinning it down. And if I want to stretch it, I'm going to stretch it. So if I'm doing something like a shawl, you know, where if this was like all lacy, I might be really, really stretching this out. Here, I just want a nice stockinette stitch fabric. I want my cast on and my bind off to look good on these swatches because these swatches are for some instructional content involving casting on and binding off. So I just want to make sure that I'm adjusting things, you know, to my liking. And like I said at the beginning, this is more of an art than a science. So I am going to put all of my pins and everything in, and then I'm going to step back and look at it. I might hold it up just to make those adjustments. Now, because I'm just doing one swatch, obviously it's very easy for me to flip around my blocking board. You know, when I'm doing something like a shawl, I put those all out on my floor in my living room. I have, unfortunately, a pet-free house, and so that's not a problem for me. But you, if you have pets, you might not want to do that in your living room. You might want to do it in another room of your house and shut the door. But I do love seeing pictures of people's cats, especially. The cats always go on the like the blocking that's on the floor. So I do enjoy seeing those pictures, but you know your animals. But because I'm just doing this one swatch, it's easy for me to just flip the, you know, the little mat around as I go. But again, if I was doing a shawl, I'd be like kneeling on the floor and, just, you know, sort of starting at one end and working my way around. Maybe the next time I knit a shawl, I will show you that process. Blocking's one of those things that I used to kind of hate it, and now I kind of love it. Literally, it does make everything look so much better. And it is a nice, like, I don't know, it's just a nice way to like finish your project. I don't know. The longer I knit and crochet, the longer I enjoy other aspects of the craft. You know, I love weaving in ends, for example, on a granny square now. Like, I love that process. Like, I don't crochet over the ends because I actually prefer to weave them in. You know, and blocking's one of those things for me too, is, I don't know, it's just, I'm trying not to rush so much. I'm trying to enjoy my time with my projects more. So blocking is one of those things. Okay. So there I've gone around and I'm looking at it, you know, I feel like this is like not perfectly straight here. Again, it just, this is all also how picky you want to get. I'm going to photograph this eventually. So I want it to, I mean, I don't know, it's knitting. What is perfect knitting, you know? I want it to look good. Like I want it to look as straight as possible because I am going to photograph it eventually. And so, yeah, I'm just going to keep adjusting till I'm happy with it. I mean, I could fiddle with this for, you know, 20 minutes if I wanted to, even though it's just a rectangle. Okay, but we'll stop there. You get the idea. I might fiddle with that a little more later. And then, of course, I would just repeat that for the second swatch as well. You know, and I would just sort of just leave these ends hanging out so I could weave them in later, obviously. And at this point then, once you're happy with it, we're just going to call it good enough for now. Once you're happy with how you've blocked it, you are going to leave it until it is completely dry. And so I will show you this once it's completely dry. And how long it's going to take to dry depends on a lot of factors. So obviously how wet it is when you put it out to block, that's going to matter. If you live somewhere that's really humid, that's going to matter. So that, you know, the type of yarn it is going to matter. And so just keep in mind, it's going to take a while. I will always leave them at least overnight. Depending on the yarn, if I made something with like a super bulky yarn, it might take more than 24 hours for it to dry. But that's fine. You just leave it be. And once it's completely dry, then we'll take it off the blocking board. So we will come back and take a look at it then. It's the next day and my swatch is fully dry. So let's take it off the blocking board. So to really check that it's dry, I do like to feel a little like underneath the fabric, like feel to the wrong side to make sure it's dry, because sometimes, again, with this being wool yarn, it can be a little sneaky, and that the top sometimes can feel like it's pretty dry, but then when you reach underneath, it does still feel a little bit damp. So I had already done that, so I can tell that it's dry. And so now all I need to do is just take off all of my pins. And you can see that it's holding its shape really well. It's not really moving too much as I take it off of the blocking board. Wool is one of those things that it has memories. So once you've gotten it wet and you've shaped it, it really is going to hold that shape. And this particular swatch that I knit is mostly in stockinette stitch. So I do have a little bit of a garter stitch border on either side, but this particular swatch, I want to be showing the cast on and the bind off for just something that I'm working on, a future project. And so this is stockinette stitch right along here to the bottom. And you may know that stockinette stitch here, this particular type of knitted fabric, that it can curl, and it will curl more this way on itself, I find, than like this way on itself, but it still will curl at the top and the bottom. But you can see now that I've blocked it, it really is pretty flat. There's very minimal curl here, which is really nice. You know, it's never going to be perfect with stockinette stitch because of the tendency to curl, but this is just a really great example of how important blocking can be, because if you just had this little stockinette stitch swatch, this would be all rolling up on itself, and now you can see it's nice and flat. And really, I don't know if you could tell from the first clip from yesterday when I was blocking it, you know, I don't knit that evenly. I'm a pretty loose knitter, and so my stitches tend to not be very uniform when I'm knitting. And even now that I've blocked it, I do not have the most uniform stitches. But it did even things out quite significantly. And that's another thing too, is especially when you're new and, you know, typically your stitches aren't even, you know, more when you're a new knitter versus when you're more experienced. blocking can really help solve that sort of issue, in that it just sort of, by getting the fabric and the yarn wet, it kind of allows everything to relax, and it just helps even out your stitches. So that's just a little bit about blocking. So I think it's a really important step in knitting and crochet both, because I just think it can make your project look so much better, you know, and especially, you know, for someone like me who has knit and crocheted a lot of shawls, you know, blocking is so important to really show off those stitch patterns, and make your shawls look as beautiful as possible. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed this little instructional video, just me randomly working on something in my office and just kind of explaining how I'm doing it, let me know. And if you want to see more videos on blocking, I'm happy to do that. I have one shawl that's almost off the needle. I just need to bind it off. And so if you're interested in seeing me block a whole shawl, you know, maybe I can try to set something up out in my living room when I go and do that. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this, and I will see you again soon.